Okay, we're pretty much dry, not 100%, but dry enough that I can push forward toward completion. And as I said, what I need to do now is just add the last bits, little bits more dark, a little bit of clarity here and there. I want to amplify some of the obscurity that I work so hard to maintain and or to create. So I don't want to get rid of all of it. I don't want to add too much detail, but just bits and pieces where I think it'll help orchestrate the interest and amplify the story. So to do that, I think I'm going to use largely flat brushes for some additional dry brush technique. For the most part, I'm going to be relying on these guys. These are Perla by Escoda, Perla series by Escoda brushes. They're very good quality, but they come in these very small sizes, and that will come in handy for me. I will start way up here in the distance. So back here, I want to be pretty minimal about anything I do. I just don't want this, I don't want to cause too much attention to be drawn to this area, for one thing, but if I add too much additional detail, it'll tend to pull forward, and we don't want that. So less is definitely more back here. I'm using warm tones, at least for now, the deeper brown, the Van Dyke brown, and some lighter browns, the umbers. So just, you can see what I'm doing. I probably don't need to explain it, but just accentuating some sense of shadowing without, I hope, being too specific about it. In a way, it's adding more obscurity in a strange way by just adding some hints of detail without being terribly obvious, I think. I love it when that works in a painting. Like you think you're looking at something in it. You may be, but it just causes the viewer to look closer and become a little bit invested in the work. If you don't tell them everything, but you just imply detail without showing it is really a goal of mine. Or showing just a little bit of detail can imply a great deal more that you haven't actually shown. So there, I like that movement, but I think the umber color is a little too fresh, so I'll knock it down a little with some neutral tint. Yeah, and it's, you know, the idea of a window without going crazy. This is often the downfall for me in a painting. Feeling the need to show too much detail. Already, I think maybe that's pushing it, but I think we'll be okay as I move on. If I determine later I think that that's too dark, I can soften it a little, but I think generally it's okay. I don't honestly know what this thing is here, but just give it a little bit of abstract gestural movement. Apologize, I have to move this around a bit just to make it easier for me to reach. I do this sometimes and I pull it out of frame and then people can't see what I'm doing. So I'm gonna try to be careful to keep it all in frame. I've decided to do this video at a wider format overall, meaning showing much of my desktop, the palette, and everything. So The downside there is it's not as close to the painting, but I'm hoping people could zoom in if they need to, but I get asked a lot if I could show my colors, my palette as I'm painting, so I thought that's really not a bad idea. And then as people are watching, it's easy enough to zoom in on the actual painting, but you can't zoom in on something that's not filmed, so I'm including a little bit more visual information. So these flat brushes allow these, I think, particularly beautiful characteristics of dry brush to come through, these marks that start with a lot of clarity and then just feather out with this ambiguity that I always think it's beautiful, but for this particular painting, I think it's an appropriate way to tell this story. It's sort of a contrast between the clear and the not clear, the stated and the implied. And again, I'm trying to give a little definition to these windows, but not too much, so that it looks like a technical drawing, and also maintain a little bit of the light, but not too much. Just to enliven the painting. Little sparkles of light up here I think are good, but you don't want too much that they will compete or detract from what's happening down below. Yeah, that works. So leaving it alone is not my strong suit, but I think I have to do that. Yeah, it's a curse. I think I love drawing, and so I can draw too much. I can overdraw my base drawing sometimes and have to police myself to not do that. And I love painting, so sometimes if I make a mark that I think is good, for whatever crazy reason, my instinct is to make another one just like it or on top of it. I think with experience in painting, hopefully you learn not to do that as much, but yeah, I'm still guilty of it. Trying very hard to make fewer marks rather than more and make them look like they have all the confidence that I don't necessarily have, but I pretend I have. And that's the key, isn't it? You don't have to be confident, you just have to pretend you are and convince others. So here you can see what I'm doing. I'm adding, I don't want to use the word detail, but I guess it works. Identity seems better. Detail makes it sound like it's very specific, and it is in a sense, but in another sense it's not. It's sort of general. I'm adding marks that I think make the painting better, but they're not necessarily just because I'm not painting something just because it's there in the reference photo or accurate to real life. I'm only doing it if I think it helps enliven or improve the painting. So that's why I don't like to use the word detail, because detail sounds like you're just a slave to accuracy and specificity, and I can be that, but I don't want to be, and I've worked for years to not be that. So for example, this part of the wall is closer than that, so in order to tell the story of distance and depth, you're going to want to add a little bit of more identity to this portion and not as much to that. And consequently, more so here, so you'll get a subtle sense of somewhat foreground, midground, background, but hopefully that will pull forward slightly just because of the saturation of values and colors and the amount of this kind of so-called detail or identity work that I will add. This is a very small, not a rigger, but a small round brush that I tend to use for wiring and small tree limbs and that sort of thing. Some of these railings, this is the kind of thing you can really go overboard, but a little bit of this filigree I think helps. Too much decidedly doesn't help. Excuse me. Okay, now I'm going to move down here into the more primary part of the painting. What that'll help me do is assess more clearly if I need any more up here or not. I'm going to guess not, but we'll see. If this looks wildly out of place, that will help inform. But again, I try to work on the lightest lights, the midtones, then the darkest darks. So many of the darkest darks will happen here. So once all those major values are laid in, it'll be easier for me to go back and determine if I need some attention somewhere else. This is just right out of the tube, neutral tint, very little water. A little water, of course, or it wouldn't move, but not much. So this is just sort of dark on dark tones to try to amplify this focal window, of course, but also give a little bit of identity to these dormers. Such an obvious but hard lesson to learn sometimes, that as a painter, you don't have to paint everything you see. It really is a delicate balance between telling the viewer and asking them, really, sort of asking them to figure it out, making them a little curious. So not painting everything you see is almost always a better way to go about it. In this particular painting, it definitely is, because that's sort of the ambiance I'm trying to create. So where some things are a little defined and then others are much less obtuse, it's just a very a more painterly way to go about things, but also I think it's a better experience for the viewer. Not 100% sure how I want to treat these windows, but they are too light just yet. So value is the key, and value is almost always the answer. Color is almost always the question, and value is almost always the answer. The actual color matters very often less than you think. Yeah, that's good. Little one was what I'm struggling with internally is trying to figure out if I should paint the glass in this window quite dark. I think maybe I should, not solidly dark, but I think it wants to be dark to more clearly amplify this one. So we'll see. This is an 1/8 inch flat brush, one of these Perlas by Escoda. Not sure the value is wrong, but I'm not sure if that's the way to paint them because I want it to be a little less technical looking and a little scruffier. So let's see if I can scruff it up a bit. There's some deep blue in some of them. Yeah, not loving that at all. This is some teal blue I'm just going to scrape up from the bottom. To knock back some of that white, not all of it, but to sort of imply glass in the windows. Yeah, that's much better. Again, little sparkles of light I think are good to knit everything together, but nothing to compete with that diva over there. Now this third dormer here, it's further away from the center of focus, so logically, it wants less attention, but it is in this plane, so a little bit of attention is good. Oh yes, it's such a delicate balance. Some of these roof seams, I'll dry brush in, just some idea of them, but again, if I draw all of them exactly the way they look, the painting's gonna risk being very dry and technical looking. And I do not want that. So here I'm doing this same failed approach I did on the second one, because I think the way I tried to fix it actually worked pretty well. So I'm going to use the same tack here. Or I paint in a few of the window panes dark, but not as dark, so it looks further away. And then with some teal, I'll paint up from the bottom to try to bleed in all those details and scruff it up a little bit. Saving little bits of white, but not too much. Not certain I should do this, but I want to indicate just a subtle shadow of these dormers on the roof, because I just think it'll help give them a little dimension. But I don't want to make too big of a deal out of it, because that would imply there's some sun or some light source shining on them, and there really isn't. But just a subtle shift, I think, is not bad. Right. All right, not bad. A little bit too much white on this one, but dry brush will take care of that. Okay, I want a fairly somewhat crisp shadow of the cornice down against the wall. again, there isn't a super bright light source, but I still think even in the early evening, there would be some shadowing here. So this is a deep brown. Won't be a super strong shadow the way it would be if it was a bright sunny day, but yeah, something like that I think's enough. Don't forget to paint with your finger. Just like gravity, it's still free for a while anyway. Yeah, that's okay. I don't know if it's as good as it could be, but I think it generally works. I might add some dry brush tonality to kind of mess up this wall a little, add some additional sense of connection, a little further amplification of texture. Yeah, it's okay. I think what I'm reacting to is a little tentative with this deeper shadow. I think I could go a little stronger here. At least under my focal point window. Right, now these windows, not that critical, but they are part of this plane, so they are forward. So I think at least the tops of these windows need a little bit of this treatment, and then they can fade out. I'm using pretty murky tones of Van Dyke brown and ultra blue. Again, I'm just trying to define maybe the top row of window panes and then fade everything out to nothing. Again, little sparkle of light there I think is good, but too much we don't want. While you're here, I just want to thank everybody for watching my channel. I do hope to be spending more time on YouTube. My regular teaching and exhibiting and life gets in the way for me to spend as much time here as I'd like. But I think that'll be changing. But I love the sort of informal atmosphere of it, and I like the accessibility. And I love getting notes from people that say it's really helped them. That means a lot. So just thank you all. I don't know that it's my main mission in life to help people paint, but I suppose it's one of the things that makes me the happiest. Not not necessarily to help people paint, but yes, if that's your thing, but just to make things. Just the time we spend in life creating something that didn't exist before, that's art. You know, that could be painting, obviously. It could be writing or music or baking or gardening or raising children. Anything we do in life where we make something that wasn't there and we try to find new and better, more positive and creative ways of doing it is just, well, it's everything. So in my small way, I love being part of that. And if I can help anybody feel a little more comfortable in making things, whether that's painting again or something else, I'm all about it. I knew this painting was kind of ambitious because it had a lot of subtleties, which are easy to talk about sometimes, but harder to achieve. But it would have a lot of sort of quick and subtle transitions that had to be effective. Just things like this, where something starts out clear and then has to become pretty obscure very quickly in order to help tell the story. It's a great thing to learn in watercolor, painting in general, but it doesn't always work. So I think as a subject to discuss, this is a good one. Well, I'm getting near the end. I'm just adjusting now amounts of detail and clarity that I want. I'll probably obscure a few things here and there, adding some obscurity, adding some clarity. Obviously, you're probably thinking, what about the window that you saved? Oh yes, that's on deck. But right now, I'm just trying to beef up the center of interest a little bit more, feather this detail out, so this really becomes our star of the show. I think it's working. So after all this time just assessing, I think you can see the tonality of the sky looked fairly dark when I first put it on, but it doesn't now. And the thing I was worried about with this was that I wondered if I had not enough light saved, or space really, to make the light that I saved work. But now that the painting is nearing completion, I think there is plenty. I think I saved enough. And again, if you remember, I was unsure if I thought a figure in the window would be a good idea or a bad idea. I think it's a good idea because it's a relatively small figure amongst a larger area. So I think it'll add a little note to amplify the narrative, but also to compositionally flesh out the painting a little better. And I think there's enough white area that there'll still be plenty of light. So the way I'd like to paint this window is to save pure untouched paper at the top and then grade it down into a brighter yellow orange at the bottom. So that's what I'll do with this small Escoda Versatile brush, around number 4. So I'm just starting off with clear water at the top so that it saves the light, but that I don't end up with a hard line. Then I'm going to use a brightish yellow. This is an Arulian yellow. Pretty transparent, but pretty bright. Just a little. I'm going to paint right over the figure because I think the figure will be darker than the window beyond, so there's no need to cut around the figure in the window. And then at the bottom, this is a Daniel Smith permanent orange. So it's quite orange, but it's very transparent. And I'm hoping this yellowish orange shape will really offset some of the murkier cool tones throughout the rest of the painting. Yeah, I think it does. I think it's working. There's a window I left open here, so I'll give it just some abstract family of this color at the top, some orange, just because I have a brush filled with it. There's a sill at the bottom of the window, but I think I'll just leave it unpainted. So then I have to paint the figure, and that's one of the last things I'll have to do, but this warm wash has to dry first, so that means I'll go off to some other area and see if I can ruin the painting in these unnecessary details. Some railings on the windows. Love doing this kind of thing, but wow, it's a place where you can just instantly make your painting go from looking pretty good to overworked in no time. So this kind of stuff, a little definitely goes a long way. Don't know that I need to do this, but I want to. I'm going to add a little dimension in some of these roof metal panels. I think if I remember the reference photo, they really are. There's a darker bit of these panels down below, and so I'm not doing that because it's necessarily really there, but I just think just another textural dimension. Also, proof that there's always time to completely mess up an otherwise okay painting. There's still time to overwork it, Tom. Hang in there, you can do it. Can't count the number of paintings I have overworked. I think I was implying that earlier. I love painting so much that it's hard to stop. I just don't want to stop making marks. And yeah, well, that's the highway for making an overworked painting. Too many marks. So I'm proceeding doing that now, but I'm doing so with caution. I think I'm still okay, but I'm beginning to see a red light starting to flash, so that means back off. Just adjusting some values. Are we dry here yet? Almost, but I think I'll just hit it with a hairdryer. dislike using the hairdryer generally because on a small area like that, it's not such a hazard, but if you paint a very large, say a big wash, for example, and it comes out nicely, but it's still quite wet, and you hit it with a hairdryer, you can quite literally blow the pigment right off the page, and invariably you'll end up with a streak or a blob, or the wash will at the very least dry much flatter than it was before. Especially if you use the rough surface paper, because the pigment sinks into the little valleys and floats over the mountaintops, and you get this really beautiful characteristic speckled effect with watercolor that gives the painting more life and luminosity and dimension. Anyway, the hairdryer can just blow the pigment right out of the little valleys, and besides streaks, the painting can dry so flat and gray when it really wasn't flat and gray. So, but again, in a smaller area like this, generally it's not a problem because you're not relying too much on that textural effect. So I just used a darker version of the orange. I dropped a little bit of a Daniel Smith earthy light red into that. Then a little bit of violet along the top of the figure to add some dimension. I guess that works. I think it dulled out the color a little, but it's not such a big deal. I want the figure to look warm, but not bright red or something. Just a subtle warm glow. Yeah, I don't really like it. I think it's too specific at the bottom. So while it's wet, I'm gonna just lighten the bottom of the figure with a paper towel. And I think that effect is somewhat better. For the person in the window, the definition becomes a little blurred out by the light behind. And then I think I'm going to drop a little more orange in while it's still wet, just to brighten it up a little. Yes, overall, generally, that's better. Feather it out with your finger. Yeah, that tells the story without being overly specific, I think. That one little spot of saved white paper, I think, is good. And I can assess the rest of the painting. If I think these areas of white are too much, I think they're not. I think it works. It sort of makes a nice pattern figure throughout the painting, but it all culminates right there where you want. So I think it works. And a little hint of the railing there in front of this poor soul in case they're contemplating something tragic. Some failed Parisian romance or something. Oh. We'll save that for Italian opera. So for the most part, I believe that's it, everyone. As this dries, as I always do, I will come back a little later and assess it once I give myself a breather, just to see if there's anything it absolutely needs or not. I think overall the story I tried to tell, though, works. I wanted an evening view, not where the sort of the visibility was lower and things were a little bit out of focus, but the context was pretty clear. The focal point, of course, is the figure standing in the window, and that's the brightest area of the painting, also surrounded with the darkest tones of the painting, which I hope not too obviously, but clearly sets up a center of focus. It just draws the eye. The eye is always going to be drawn to wherever the highest degree of contrast is, almost always. So then the rest of the painting has descending degrees of contrast. Perhaps the second or third highest is the skyline of the buildings beyond as they intersect the sky, but I still think that was essential just in order to establish the whole narrative of the Parisian evening that I was trying to paint. But I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you learned some tips or something useful. And yeah, happy painting, and I'll see you all soon.